Alrighty, so we got a mini project 3 here. I think by far this one was the most difficult. Had that new computer, and Android Studio was easy to set up, but Unity was a nightmare. Hadn't even installed it, and had to get everything installed and set up, and then my come to find it out, USB debugging doesn't work for some reason, so I couldn't run it directly on my phone and get all those nice little console messages. So probably the first time I've ever built really anything except for really basic programs without USB debugging, and like IntelliSense was screwed up, so I definitely couldn't have built this without that. That would have been near on impossible. Maybe, but take a lot of Googling. Anyways, so here we go. These were actually, this line was my debug log statement, pretty much. I would just make the bottom right tile black, and that would tell me where, and sometimes tiles above it. But nevertheless, let's jump into this. So this is an entirely new script. It's about 281 lines, including comments and stuff, of course. I didn't really do a lot. This was open more for my reference than anything. I didn't change anything in Unity, so that's the first for these videos. So everything happened here in Visual Studio. So usually there's heavy changes in both, but for this one it was just Visual Studio. The shop's probably the easiest one to look at. There was a few things that I had to take out. So the first was that it had a whole method here where it was like, or this whole bit of code that would find the tiles around it and around the castles tile. I've still got that, but I moved it to the unit controller script, and the reasoning for that was just that once I realized how I wanted this particular shop script to work, it no longer needed to find those, and that job was up to the unit controller. So really, all the shop script does anymore is it provides like a overlay shop GUI for the map, which is great. And then if the user clicks on the By Night button, and of course there'll be other unit buttons eventually, then it will actually, it sends sort of like an intent. It's kind of inspired by the way that the Android system uses intents and things like that. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what this is, but there's a public variable up here somewhere where it says by night, and it's equal to false. And what happens is when the user presses the by night button, it changes that. Oh, that's for the button. Yep. Never mind. So then it changes this here, changes the flag here on the button to false. That way it won't run a second time. But then it will change the by night flag to true, and that tells the unit controller script somewhere right here to go ahead and run and purchase a night for the user. To simplify things a good deal, I decided to restrict the user to no more than 8 units, and I haven't got into killing units yet, so I haven't. I'm sure it'll be possible with the current setup, but I'll have to figure out how to actually destroy those objects and decrement the counter and things like that. But the framework's there now. I just haven't implemented that. Anyways, rambling so much on this one. So this is the unit controller script. So it's got a bunch of class variables and things like that up here. Right here you see there's 2 that reference some objects. So for one, this is a shop object that actually represents the shop script, and this is a game object called the castle tile. So this references our castle tile. So now this one here references the night prefab, and a prefab is basically like an instance of a game object that's saved in the editor. There's a bunch of stuff online about them, but that's basically what it's used for, kind of a blueprint for a particular thing. So I created a prefab for the night units, and this is just used to display it graphically. See, we have a array of game objects called tiles, and this holds 8 tiles. These are the tiles around the castle. And here's an array of units, which holds 8 units. And I actually created a unit class, so it'll actually hold objects from my class there. Now we've got a unit counter right here. This is going to limit the number of units to 8, which is important because if you get more than 8, you have to start figuring out whether or not there's an empty tile around the castle, which started to get pretty complicated. Not terribly so, but without debug.log statements and stuff like that, it was a little tricky. Plus, eventually I gave it some thought, and I don't really think that the user needs more than 8. This is kind of a simple mobile turn-based strategy game, so they're not going to need really more than 8. So that I just decided to cap it at that. And then let's see, there's an array here that represents the game board. Now this is important. I'll come back to this later, but all of the unit objects have to point back to this game board because this is basically a system to prevent them from moving to the same tile, because then weird stuff happens. It's still not perfect, and there's a little bug I've got to work out that I'll go over in a second. So here's our start method right here. So at the start, we have to reference the game objects. Since this is a mono behavior class, I have to reference them in here inside the start method. So we reference the shop script on the castle, and we also reference the castle's tile, and then we call the find adjacent tiles method. Now that is down here. This is actually code that I ripped out of the shop script, and I went over it in a previous video. Just to summarize it though, it gets the name of the castle tile. It parses the coordinates from that into a row number and column number, and then it determines if there's any columns, or it determines if there's if tiles around that tile exist, and if so, it'll add them to the tiles array. There, and a nice little bit of logic. So that, but I think I went over that in another video. So exact same code from the shop script, just pulled over here and put in this method so it can be called conveniently. So that's called whenever this starts, so it'll find the tiles around it, which are useful for instantiating knights or other units in the future. So now here we got our update method. This code will run every frame once per frame. So right here, if the user wants to buy a knight, and this is if the user presses the buy knight button, the shop changes this flag variable to true, and this will cause this code to execute. And then we want to make sure that they've not exceeded their limit. So if the unit counter is less than 8, if they don't have 8 units yet, then we'll create a new unit. And this line is pretty insane looking. It's not so bad really. There's a here's our units array. So what we want to do, we want to store this new unit, in this case a knight. We want to store the knight in the place in the unit array that corresponds to the number of units. So like that way there's 8 spots in the units array, and the unit counter will only have the 8 different possible values. So that allows us to create 8 unique knights there. And so we'll add it to its spot. So in this case, if it's the first one, this is going to be unit 0. So then we'll say equals a new unit, and there's a big constructor down there I'll take a look at in a second. But we create a new unit, and we have to instantiate the knight prefab. So this is the name of the prefab in Unity, and then we have to give it a position. So we create a new vector3 object and pass it to the constructor. It has the position of the tile in the castle, because the way the code works, as the unit counter increments, it travels around the castle. So it'll start at the left tile and then go all the way to the bottom left tile, clockwise around the castle. So if this were the first one, it would be, if this were the first knight, it would be instantiated with the position of the tile to the left of the castle. With the exception of the Z coordinate. For that one, we want to say -1 because the camera is actually in the negative Z direction, looking towards the positive direction, and the map is in the positive direction. So we have to give it a slightly negative value in order for it to be visible. Otherwise, it would be underneath or inside of one of the map tiles. And then this here, quaternion identity, it's a rotation value because people would want to instantiate a this prefabs in 3D space. So since it's 2D, we don't want to have a rotation. Quaternion.identity is the rotation of the parent object, which in this case would have no rotation, it would just be flat. So actually, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure this is the camera. Not 100%, but as far as what I can gather, I think quaternion.identity in this case refers to the camera, since that's the game object the script is attached to. In any case, though, the instantiate method requires that you provide this, and there's a couple different overloaded constructors or overloaded methods, but this is the best one I could find for this circumstance. But what this will do, though, instantiate actually returns a reference to the new object, and that actually gets saved in a unit object down at the bottom. So then what we do here, we have tiles, unit counter, so we're going to find the corresponding tile, which was the tile that's, this is where the tile that the position came from, and this becomes like the unit's first tile. What we'll do, we pass that to the constructor for the new unit, and that allows us to kind of gives the unit a starting point. This string here is the type of unit, in this case a knight. I'm not sure how useful this will be. I'm thinking I might be able to use it for the combat system to actually kill another unit and restrict and change things like move points and stuff like that. But I still haven't, of course, broken any ground on that, so I may just have to scrap that whole idea. For now, though, it serves to just show on the game board that something's there. And then we pass it a reference to this game board. Now, this is where that got important. I had a whole glitch where, like, no matter what I would do, even though I was adding everything to a game board array, that a unit would still be able to move on to another unit, and they would occupy the same space and pretty much just become one unit. Anyways, what would happen was that I had put the game board array inside of the unit class, so every unit object had its own game board array, so they weren't communicating with each other, and the code was actually functioning properly. It's just the game board was declared in the wrong space, and also for some reason I couldn't really access that. I couldn't access the game board array in this object just by typing it out, so I had to pass a reference during the construction of the object. So hopefully we can cover the rest of the update, and I'll have to split this in another video. But we increment the unit counter, and then we change the shop.byNight flag there to false. That way it doesn't continuously buy knights until it buys all 8. And then here we move all units and I'll have to look at that more in depth in the next video.